What famous person did horrible things that people largely forgot about? Remember when a 16-year-old girl overdosed in Don Henley's house? He pled guilty to minor misdemeanor charges and then wrote a song about how mean the media was to him. Because I feel like almost no one does. I'm sitting here wondering why I've never heard about this. When I know why. I was 10-11 when it happened, so my parents protected me from it. Yikes. Mom and Dad, what the? Don Henley was a big name in our house. Geez, I wish I had known that every time they put his albums on. It shows how an influential person with money can dim the truth. Soulja Boy beat a pregnant woman into having a miscarriage. I had a practice recording studio down in Atlanta with dozens of other artists in this big complex. Soulja Boy was in there for a month or two recording that breakout song where he just repeats his name a bunch of times. The douche left those steel drums on his monitors at full volume for like a month. All I heard of when coming in was those 5 steel drum notes on repeat indefinitely all day every day. That bled through everyone's recording. And people told him to use headphones or turn it down, but he never did because he was a douche. You can imagine my ire when that annoying song started getting played at the club I worked at during the night. Floyd Mayweather beat the out of his former girlfriend and got away with it because the judge allowed him to train for a fight he was headlining. In our real-life court systems, over our centuries of common laws and British laws and further refined into our American laws. In fact, we want a criminal to have a job. There is often an example given in beginning law school. A plumber has hit a man with his wrench and is found guilty. The judge may sentence him harshly but will not order his wrench to be taken from him or forbid him from wrenches. The judge would then be sentencing society to a penalty. Homeowners with broken pipes are deprived of a service. There is also the idea, less theory and more sheer practical purpose. You want a criminal to have a job and do a job. There is nothing good about a criminal who has nothing else to do, nothing to build, nothing to lose, nothing to gain. Not only that, when you're talking about releasing someone and being certain they won't flee the jurisdiction, then yes, a job such as being a main event fighter is a good assurance they probably won't flee. They may as well be doing something useful for society and that obligates them to supervision and schedules than taking up a jail cell. Robert H. Richards IV. Richards, who's the heir to the DuPont family's estimated $14 billion, was arrested in 2009 for repeatedly wally assaulting his 3-year-old daughter. The billionaire offered to take a polygraph test to clear his name, but he failed the exam and eventually confessed to the charges. He should have received a sentence of potentially 30 years in prison, but his lawyers were able to change the charge to 4th-degree rape, and he was given 8 years in prison. However, the court believed he wouldn't fare well in prison, so his sentence was suspended and he was freed on probation. Kurt Johnson. The billionaire whose family owned the household products company S.C. Johnson was arrested in March 2011 for molestation, faced with a potential 40-year sentence for repeatedly assaulting his teenage stepdaughter. The businessman, who was worth an estimated $4.2 billion in 2019, only received 3 months in prison and a fine of $6,000. Alongside the short prison term and the fine that hardly made a dent in his fortune, Johnson also didn't have to register as an offender. Kurt Johnson. His sons, Woody and Christopher, are just as evil, if not worse. 30 years ago, they acquired a separate business venture from their father. They purchased a product that had the primary objective of improving the lives of tens of millions of people all across the northeastern United States. Over the course of the last 3 decades, they have methodically worked on destroy that business. Their only motivation for destroying it is because it allows them to inflate their own ego by associating themselves with the product's rapidly depleting brand image. This week, they even publicly announced their intention to spend $150 million to partner with a vocal anti-vaxxer media celebrity. Remember, their legacy is from J&J, who made the first COVID vaccine. They will stop at nothing to slowly torture and destroy the spirit of the any community. It's been 30 years since they purchased the New York Jets, and they will seemingly never sell the team. Truly evil. I worked on someone's home from the Johnson family. I don't know how close they were to the center of the S.C. Johnson corporate name they were, but I assume not very after meeting them a few times. They were clearly wealthy, but also the nicest possible people in a genuine and kind way. But now every time I read or listen to or watch a story and learn what this company did, I always look back and think, did these family members know? Did the dad and mom sort of know? Was the whole thing built around them so they didn't? Or did they know about everything the whole time and just kept living life like they were on a different magical planet, far away from all the millions of people their chemicals affected, just doing business like they always have? Jack Nicholson beat a prostitute that he hired to the point of irreversible brain damage. He found out at age 37 that the woman he thought was his sister was really his mother. She was 18 years old when she gave birth to him. The woman he thought was his other sister was really his aunt. Because his mother was so young when she gave birth, her parents chose to raise Jack as their own son, and thus everyone thought his mother was really his sister. And he didn't find this out from family. Time magazine was researching the actor and found this out and then revealed it to him. If that doesn't you up, I don't know what does. Vince Neil only got 30 days and he ed somebody. The judge thought it was more productive or advantageous for the victims in the car he hit to get paid a large settlement rather than Neil going to jail. If Neil went to jail for a decade, then the victims would get zero money. But if he remained free and able to tour and make albums and make millions, then he could pay the victims a large settlement. It's actually a fascinating scenario. Imagine you were hit by a drunk driver and suffered a lifetime injury that negatively affected you for the rest of your life. It hampered your ability to hold a full-time high-paying job. Would you want the person that hit you to go to jail and you received no money? Or would you rather they went to jail for a month and paid you a couple $1 million? Jared Leto. Bro really raped and Wally assaulted underage girls and so much people act like he's done nothing wrong. Not even any deal or movie drops. He's still consistently hired all around and it's the dumbest in the world. Holy so when his Thai band started out, my friends convinced me to take them to the show. We met up with some other friends at the concert. At the time too, we're 14. After the show he came up to the table, asked how we liked the show and kept on talking to the two younger girls. Eventually he invited them to his trailer but they both declined. He basically ignored everyone and was hyper-fixated on the younger girls. Dude's a creep. That's Hollywood for you. Weinstein was doing this for years before he got caught prosecuted, and that took an entire grassroots movement to cause him to face consequences. And he's just the one who got caught. They all do this. It's like when George Floyd's murderers got sentenced to prison. It's great that they were brought to justice, but it only happened because we rioted for 1.5 years straight in every part of the country. All we got was justice for a single man. What about the other several million racist cops that do the same thing? That is some ED up. I didn't know that this is why Brendan bowed out from the limelight. Fraser is a national treasure as far as I'm concerned. You sent me down a rabbit hole I didn't want to traverse, but I'm also glad to have a new perspective on why he was out of the spotlight for so long. I've met Brendan a few times. The first time is when he came into one of the places at which I used to work with a small party. Recognized him at a table, went up and asked if it was him, introduced myself and had a pleasant exchange. Asked him and his party if they were hungry. They hadn't been given food menus and that I'd take care of them as long as they tipped their server. They were, in fact, hungry and I served them up some world-class BBQ. Dude was seriously awesome. Like, just a really nice and awesome person. We cracked jokes, they enjoyed their meal and drinks. It was a great night. Their server didn't know who he was, so I had to tell her what was up. They came back a couple more times and every time he'd ask for me personally. Always left a very generous tip to their servers and was an absolute angel to interact with. Love that dude so much. Alexander Graham Bell. Yes, the telephone guy, campaigned for and eventually helped to outlaw sign language in both deaf and hearing schools, hoping to integrate schools with both deaf and hearing students. Instead, he ended up depriving deaf students who were not able to hear of language. The last of these laws banning sign in the US was finally repealed in 1979. Canada didn't finish ridding themselves of these laws until 2010. I remember looking up Bell's wiki for unrelated reasons and learning he was a huge proponent of eugenics. Not that I idolized him or anything, but it certainly was heavier than I was in the mindset for. Having not heard of this before, this sounds to me like a classic example of the phrase, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." It sounds like he wanted deaf people to not be treated differently. Mild spoilers for Creed 3, but Creed's daughter is deaf and goes to a deaf school where she gets bullied. After a fight at school, Creed and his wife are discussing what happened, and he says at a deaf school like that, Creed lets slip that he views them as different, be they deaf or crippled or autistic or disabled. We shouldn't treat them like second-class people. While individually we cannot overcome every bias, we should strive as a society to treat everyone the same. Or maybe he really wasn't who seeing deaf people as less than, who should not be given the opportunity to learn the same as hearing people by taking away funding for their education in order to fund or pocket something else. This was at a time when opinion was flip-flopping on whether it was better to focus on giving deaf people accommodations for navigating society, such as teaching sign language, or if it was better to focus on teaching dead people to navigate society as is, such as teaching lip reading. Proponents of the latter thought that it would help them integrate better and be othered less. Bell was not trying to be cruel to deaf people, he just belonged to a school of thought that happens to not be very popular anymore. In fact, many people close to him were deaf, and he was a big advocate for the community. Salvador Dali found a thrill in torturing and in living things, both animals and humans. He tried to his sister and one of his lovers. He tortured and ate animals. George Orwell wrote a scathing condemnation of our willingness to overlook what a horrible sociopath he was just so that he might paint us another pretty picture. About a decade ago, I worked with this old guy who claimed to have been friends with Salvador Dali when he was younger. He said he sometimes hung out with Dali when he was painting, and Dali would occasionally convince women to come back to his studio to let him paint them in the nude. Then Dali and this guy would jerk off to the naked women together. I'm not sure which would be worse, that story being true or an 80-plus-year-old man making up a story about jerking off with Salvador Dali and telling it to me, a then 25-year-old woman. At this point, asking which famous person didn't do horrible things is probably a shorter list. Post seems like a genuine person. I don't even like his type of music for the most part, but have watched enough interviews of his that I just love him as a person and have even learned to enjoy some of his music as I was trying to get into his music just to show him support. I'd be so sad to find out he is also trash, but from what I've heard from a lot of people who have met him, he is a genuine humble human being. Chris Isaak was recording at a music studio on the lot where I worked at a TV production company, my dream job. This was 1999 to 2000, and I was a really big Chris Isaak fan, so I was super excited about that. On Friday afternoon, the head of my department called me in and fired me. Not for cause, but because my previous boss had left and my new boss didn't want her leftover assistant. I had to pack up my stuff and leave immediately. I was devastated. Worse, Chris Isaak decided to come outside for a smoke break just as I was carrying all my stuff to my car and ugly crying. He ended up talking to me for a good 10 minutes while I sniffled, told me that he'd been fired more times than he could count, that I'd move on to something better, just a lot of encouraging kind stuff. I vaguely recall him saying he was so broke he once lived out of his car and survived on carrot sticks, and he'd turned out just fine. In all honesty, I was mortified at the time and just wanted to go home and cry. But his kindness and concern for me in that moment have always stayed with me. Don King stomped an employee to death after pistol whipping him over $600 that he claimed the man owed him in the form of a gambling debt. Then, probably with no small amount of lobbying on his part, the Cleveland City Council considered renaming the same street where it happened after him. No, not after the victim, Sam Garrett, but after the man who again stomped him to death, who was convicted, although he unfortunately only served just shy of 4 years in prison, after which he was and is a free man, while Sam Garrett obviously is still deceased. Not quite only in America, but man, there are too many stories like this, and seemingly more with each passing day. It would be nice to have a functioning justice system. Worthless pieces of like Don King will eventually go the way of all flesh, whether they go on to burn in hell for eternity or not, but there should be some accounting in this life as well. The Marcos family in the Philippines. They're back in power after cleverly gaming the May 2022 presidential elections. They systemically looted the country for decades and initiated a policy of exporting Filipinos to other countries as slaves. The Philippines never recovered. A while back, I worked with a woman who grew up in the Philippines in the 1960s and 72nd. Completely unprompted, she mentioned several times about how entire families in her neighborhood were dragged away screaming in the middle of the night, never to be heard from again. She was in her 40s, but was still traumatized. I have heard similar things from people from other countries. Growing up under martial law is a truly awful thing, and many of the adults have childhood PTSD or similar issues. Travis Scott essentially leaving his manager for dead in the studio. His loyal ex-manager who suffered from seizures had one while Travis was with him. Travis abandoned him while it was happening and went home, then texted him firing him a day later saying, "I can't have a manager who's shaking on the ground," and the lack of empathy continued with Astroworld. I helped a stranger having a seizure at the airport today near the security checkpoint. The number of people standing around with their phones out was sad. When it was over, I cleaned up her vomit and rubbed her back and wiped her face and neck with a wet towel while we waited for the paramedics. I can't imagine leaving someone having a seizure. Some people are terrible. My brother-in-law has epilepsy, and I have heard my sister talk about some of his seizures. She lays him down and holds him and talks softly to him and rubs his back and tries to help him relax. I have learned so much from all of you. I don't know if it was appropriate to rub her back. I just wanted to reassure her, tell her she was okay and not alone, and hoping it would help her relax. Everything happened so fast. I only wrote about this because we should know people can't control seizures and we are capable of helping. Up's story about Travis Scott is outrageous and selfish, and everyone deserves better than what he did. I wrote my cell number on a paper with the note, "We helped you at the airport today. I hope you feel better soon," and left it with one of the guys from the fire department. The other man who helped also wrote his contact info. She texted us today to thank us. It was her first seizure and she only remembered taking a bite of a snack and then waking up and talking to the paramedics. She also said she has lots of doctor appointments coming up when she makes it back home. Former NHL player Craig McTavish ate a woman while driving drunk, went to jail for a year and missed playing for one season. Got his name on 4 Stanley Cups afterwards and is currently an assistant coach for the St. Louis Blues. The current premier of Saskatchewan province in Canada, Scott Moe, caught drunk driving twice as a young man. Later caused an accident in which someone was dead, but the police could not prove DUI that time. Got a ticket for dangerous driving instead. One more I almost forgot. Renowned beatnik author William Burroughs ate his common law wife. Supposedly they were playing a William Tell game, only he missed the target. CeeLo Green. In 2012 he slipped a woman an ecstasy pill without her knowledge and raped her while she was unconscious. She woke up naked in his bed with no memory of what happened. His charges were eventually lowered to a felony of supplying ecstasy. In response to backlash, he tweeted, "People who have really been raped remember. And if someone is passed out, they're not even with you consciously. So with implies consent, edited because with an unconscious person isn't. It's rape. Thanks to those of you who pointed out my wording." Oracorn Thefasaden na Iudya. In 2010, a 17-year-old girl named Oracorn Thefasaden na Iudya was driving one of her father's cars without a proper driver's license. She was texting and driving and slammed into a passenger van that was carrying 14 people. She had 9 of the passengers and seriously injured the rest, causing a massive pileup on the highway. After the accident, she seemed to be unfazed and unhurt. She got out of the car, plopped her purse on the ground, and continued texting. Someone took a photo of her in that moment, and once it was passed around in the press, the public was understandably outraged. Her wealthy parents paid for a lawyer, of course, and they somehow brought the sentence of 3 years in jail for driving without a license down to just a few months of community service. Even then, she was so spoiled she often refused to show up to her duties volunteering at a hospital and complained the entire time. Roman Polanski drugged and raped a teenager and has been living in exile in Europe ever since to avoid prosecution by US authorities. This is in addition to the horrible things he was alleged to have done to his wife leading up to her murder by Manson followers. Ray Lewis is alleged to have murdered someone. Marvin Harrison of the Indianapolis Colts was also alleged to have ed someone. His gun was found in a dumpster near the crime scene, but he was never charged. Ben Roethlisberger was at a nightclub and raped girl. His dirtbag friends blocked the girl's friends from getting her out of the bathroom, and the nightclub bleached the entire bathroom by the time the cops arrived the next day. His security guard was a Pittsburgh police officer who was terminated for his involvement, even though Roethlisberger was never charged. Not confirmed 100%, but you can draw your own conclusion. Not mentioned at all anymore. Eddie Murphy was in the magazines in the late 90s for being caught with Addison Sewley, a trans prostitute, a big deal at the time, although he claimed he was just giving her a ride. Many trans prostitutes came out afterward saying they had encounters with Murphy. His lawyer hired a private investigator to find these women and pay them for their silence. Sewley did not accept. Shortly after, she claimed a hitman was after her. Not long after that, she was found dead outside her apartment window. A suspicious man was seen exiting the building. Her death was ruled an accident and was not investigated further. For all of you that say Michael Vick should be forgiven, give this a read. Most people are aware that Michael Vick was a girlfrienditor. They may even have illusions of what they think girlfriending is at its worst or the suspected actions that take place. However, what Vick did was not simple girlfriending. I have struggled real hard with trying not to hold a past against someone because I believe in forgiving and that people can change. I have come to the conclusion that some things are simply unforgivable for me. Some of those things are what he chose to do. Picture your dog or your friend's dog tossed to a couple of animals trained to fight for humans. Imagine that animal screaming as it is being ripped apart and having its throat ripped out. Imagine the person that tossed that helpless animal to the other animals just laughing as it occurs and later admitting he thought it was funny. That person who tossed the animals to the others is Michael Vick. Imagine taking a bucket used to hold water, filling it with water, and holding a dog's head in it until it drowns while it stands on land. Have you ever thought of the image of hanging a dog? He did that too. He also picked them up over his head before slamming them downward on concrete at his full force over and over. As a weightlifter, I know the strength of professional athletes. Imagine the blunt force trauma that dog felt as it hit concrete over and over from not dying the first time. He also attached jumper cables to their ears and tossed them in a pool to electrocute them. This is not about girlfriending. That has become a separate issue. The acts in girlfriending are disgusting and reprehensible. What Vick did was to take it one step further and find a way to legitimately torture dogs like a horror movie. I know that he went to prison. He was sentenced to 23 months under RICO, but that was not for the animal torture. In Virginia, he was charged with 2 Class 6 felonies, which each carried a maximum of 5 years in prison. He submitted a guilty plea to a single Virginia felony charge for dogfighting, receiving a 3-year prison sentence suspended on condition of good behavior and a $2,500 fine. In return for the plea agreement, the other charge was dropped. Everyone else, but animal advocates, seem unaware of what he truly did, and most are probably unaware of the time he actually served and for what basis. Upon exiting prison for RICO, he received a sponsorship from Nike and he went back to playing in the NFL. Now, he is an analyst on TV for football and he was just selected as a Legends captain for the 2020 NFL Pro Bowl. All because the man could run fast with a football. And the general public does not seem to mind one bit about any of it. Justin Bieber bought a baby monkey off the black market, who had undoubtedly been brought to market by being separated from its mom through poachers ing its mom to get the baby. Justin then abandoned the monkey in a German airport to avoid being caught having a black market monkey. These monkeys can die of abandonment because they bond so intensely. And Justin didn't give about it, just paid for it to be uprooted from its wild life, then left it to possibly die when he didn't want it anymore. Luckily, the authorities found someone with other rescued monkeys to care for it, and he had a chained big leopard cat at a birthday party. Anyone who treats animals poorly are horrible people. He is the scum of the earth.